cast your mind back, if you will, to those local elections. Yes, of course, the issues of bin collections and council tax was, of course, on the minds of many. But you will be familiar with the fact that also on the minds of many was a situation evolving in Gaza. It really was a key issue to many, many people. And we saw, of course, didn't we, people get elected on the back of that ticket. One of those people, the Green Party councillor, you'll be familiar with his celebration. He's had to issue an apology today. Let's remind ourselves, though, of what he said.
Raise the voice of Palestine! Allahu Akbar!
He said today that he's sorry for any upset that was caused by what he had to say. It wasn't his intention. He goes on to say he doesn't support violence on either side. He also went on to say that any misrepresentation of him shouting Allah Akbar suggests Islamophobia to me, was what he said. Now, I've got to say, the situation in Gaza has very unfortunately escalated over the last kind of few hours and days. We've also seen a situation where there has been a ceasefire deal that's been agreed to by Hamas but rejected by Israel. And I'm pondering tonight, Annunziata, what do you think is going to happen in response to this kind of escalating situation in Gaza here on the streets in Britain?
What happens here, I think, is very hard to know. But on the ground in Israel and Palestine, I think these talks are going to continue. It does seem like they are getting closer to finding some kind of common ground. And Israel rejecting the ceasefire proposal, Hamas were not going to release all of the hostages they took in October. They wanted in return the release of their own prisoners who are serving life sentences, and Israel has been burnt by doing that before. In fact, some of them were found to be the organisers of the atrocities this October that were released in 2011. These things can have very long-term effects on the country. I don't think Hamas are being reasonable, but I think it is great that there are talks ongoing, and it does seem as though there's a narrowing of the differences.
James, your thoughts?
I think that the unanimous decision by Israel's war cabinet to reject the deal, which in effect turns their back on the hostages, especially when there are protests in Israel every day for accepting the deal, including family members of the hostages, and to instead begin the assault on Rafah, which we've been told by every single humanitarian agency possible that it will intensify what is already a catastrophe. 1.4 million people are already seeking shelter.
Should they just let Hamas smuggle weapons across the border?
Please allow me to finish. It shows contempt for life, of course, contempt for Palestinian life, but also contempt for life of the hostages. And it shows that the real war aims are not the return of the hostages, but are the continuation of Israeli state policy, which is to annex as much of the Holy Land as possible, using ethnic cleansing as the method under the excuse of self-defence. That is what we have seen now.
At least the Israeli people have the ability to vote for who leads them and therefore what direction they go in, which can't be said to be true of those who are forced to live under Hamas, who may have elected them once and have been ruled by them ever since, without any say in it whatsoever. They are being used as human shields. This is completely one-sided. The Israelis did not ask to be attacked in October. However, 1,200 were killed, 200 were taken, and we don't even know how many of those hostages are still alive. Two wrongs never make a right. But the idea that they should just lie down and hand back over prisoners that have actually committed serious crimes is absolutely ridiculous.
There are thousands of Palestinians in pre-trial detention who have not been found to have committed any crimes.
And there are thousands of Palestinians who work in Israel and come and go. It's not as black and white as you would like to paint it.
I'm responding specifically to your point about Hamas asking for the return of Palestinian political prisoners. These are thousands of people most of whom have had no charges brought against them.
The lifers most certainly have. That's why they've got life sentences.
Let me ask you this. Let me bring it back to this local election issue here. I've just been playing the clip there of the candidate, one of the councillors, that got elected in the Leeds area, and that kind of celebration there. And the Green Party is saying now that they're going to, conduct an investigation. I would say he's kind of said sorry. He would say that he's fully said sorry, but he's also chucked a line in there about Islamophobia. Do you think it was right that Gaza played such a key role in a local election, which to me, a local election, it's about how many bins do I have outside, things like council tax, potholes, those kind of things. It's not necessarily about international affairs.
I completely agree with that, but I think it's actually much worse than that, and it's very much bringing religion into local politics and British politics, where we have had many a problem over the last few centuries with religion playing a very large part in our society that we have got rid of as a dangerous threat, and bringing sectarianism back to mainland UK is a great worry.
Do you agree with that, James?
We have very few real, meaningful democratic institutions in our country, and most people, when they get to vote, it would be wonderful if, when you voted, it felt like it was really making a difference on potholes and on council tax. But that is not how most people feel, which is why the overwhelming majority of people don't vote in local council elections. People will use elections to express whatever it is that is meaningful to them in those elections. The elections that Annunziata was elected in, for example, were quite meaningless elections in that they were to a body that we were going to leave that isn't...
We weren't guaranteed to leave, actually, at that point. Theresa May was doing her damnedest to keep us in, and so was the Labour Party.
That wasn't a democratic body itself.
I would agree, it completely was.
That has very little ability to democratically impact the
very
lives
identifiable.
So the reason why people used their vote to elect you was because they wanted
very different.
No, it's
from
not.
Local
It's the same thing. They
councils.
wanted to demonstrate that they wanted to leave the EU. That's why they voted for you, and I think that's completely a reasonable thing to do. If voters wanted to say
Parliament
what
in
they
the
wanted
EU.
to vote,
This was
if they wanted to vote to say, I don't like Rishi Sunak, or I do like somebody else, or I want my bins done in a different way, or I don't like a genocide carried out with British complicity, they're allowed to do that. None of that is remotely frightening or sectarian or anything else like that.
I don't know how many doors you knock on in the average election asking people what they actually think, but in fact the British people are incredibly well educated and do know what they're voting for. Time and again I'm surprised.
I did not say they don't know what they're voting for.
But they absolutely do bring up their bins being emptied, the potholes on their lane or their street, the local schools in county council elections. All these things do come up regularly, far more often than any of the national mainstream issues. They may say, I don't like Keir Starmer or I don't like Rishi Sunak, but they talk to you about the issues, and that is what those elections are for, and that is what most people use them for historically.
So my argument is not that people don't want to vote on issues. Of course they absolutely do. But when we have a pretty denuded democratic system, as I'm sure you would probably agree, there are not very many opportunities to make those positions on whatever it might be, on local schooling, on roads, on bus routes, and yes, on international policy, to make those felt.
What do you make of it all at home? As always, you can have the final say on that matter. What did you vote for when it came to your local elections? Was it those issues really, really close to your home, or was it much broader afield? I want your thoughts on that.